Hi, I'm Doug Fields with Download Youth Ministry, and I'm always honored to be able to share with courageous youth workers like yourself about ways to be more effective in what we're called to do. So thank you for your continued commitment to learn and grow and care for teenagers while pointing them to Jesus. You know, as youth workers, we learn pretty quickly that you don't have to look very far beneath the surface of a teenager's life before we discover pain. I mean, really, lurking below the shallow surface is often some type of deeper emotional pain that to the teenager feels debilitating and numbing. And I know it's not 100% accurate, but it sure seems like every teenager is hurting somewhere. I mean, just consider the emotional experiences you see when you take kids to camp, when they're away from the distractions of home and they're separated from their phones. They have space and silence to wrestle with some of the issues that they're otherwise fairly good at masking. And I could go on and on about hurting kids, but you get it. You know, a lot of the teenagers are struggling with what I would call emotional turmoil. And because of that, I want to walk you through some really basic caring tips that I believe are fundamental why you minister to teenagers. And before we dig into this too deeply, I want to make it really, really clear that some of the pain that you will encounter may be too deep for you to handle alone. And I'm usually very hesitant to even use the term counseling. So unless you're a professional licensed counselor, I prefer to use the term caring adult rather than the title counselor. And it's not unusual to find yourself in a situation where you're well past your qualifications and you're going to need to ask someone who has more experience or somebody who's a trusted, experienced counselor. And that's okay. Don't feel insecure about that at all. It's never a bad thing to ask for help. And others who have more experience, they're going to be there. And it's also really fine to refer out to professionals. But there are many times when you don't need to refer to that level of care. And God has given you the opportunity to help be a caring person in a very authentic way. And so what I want to do is let me get real specific with what I'm talking about. Let me just give you a few tips. The first is this: be present. When it's clear that a teenager is in pain, one of the most powerful actions you can take is to simply show up and be there in the middle of that pain. Now, chances are the teenager won't remember your words of wisdom during that painful time, but they will remember your gift of presence. So to be present means that you'll need to put distractions out of your mind. You're going to look him in the eyes. You're going to simply be there to listen. And, you know, we all know what it feels like to talk with someone who's not really paying attention. And we never want any teenager, especially while they're in pain, to feel this way. Just recently, a teenage boy in our community died, and the person who did the funeral was a volunteer youth worker who had given this kid the gift of his presence. See, the family didn't want or need an eloquent speaker or an ordained pastor. They actually wanted someone who had loved their kid and sat with him in his grief and was present in his care. See, being present is big. The second tip is avoid giving advice. Everyone needs good advice, but advice is typically best received on our own timing and when you're ready for it, right? I mean, if you're the giver of advice, it's not your timeline that's important. It's the teenager who is in pain who gets to dictate the timeline. So here's the basic principle that I use. When the pain is fresh, keep your advice to yourself. Instead, you can pray for wisdom and sensitivity of what to say. Just don't be too eager on what you have to say. Instead, be sensitive to when you should say it. The good advice given at the wrong time doesn't come out as good advice. It can be heard as lecturing or insensitivity. So come on, because if it's really good advice, it'll be good advice another day when the recipient is more willing to receive it. The third tip, it's pretty basic, but it's communicate compassion. And this might seem like a no-brainer, but you know, sometimes people have a difficult time expressing what they feel. And when you minister to a teenager who's in pain, let them actually see that you actually feel their pain. You don't have to cry if it's not genuine. That's not what I'm talking about. But your compassion will be limited if you don't make a genuine connection to their unique expression of pain. You know, a student in pain has a wounded heart, and genuine compassion, empathy, that that's what triggers your heart. And when they sense that you sense it, that's big. See, over the years, as teenagers have come back to me as grown-up adults, they'll often replay a situation where we were together, and it's not uncommon for that teenager to say something like, I don't really remember what you said, but I really remember that you cared. That's what we're looking for. The fourth tip is reserve judgment. Let's be honest. A lot of the pain you'll encounter in teenagers' lives will be self-inflicted pain, mostly by their bad choices. And when the difficult trials that they face are a result of their own poor decisions, it can be difficult for youth workers like us to reserve judgment. And you actually may be confused by this point, thinking, well, duh, Doug, of course I'd show grace to a hurting student. Well, good. I felt like this one was important enough to offer as a basic reminder and be okay with the fact that you might think it's too simple. I've just seen too many youth workers respond with disapproval rather than grace. Confrontation and gentle correction, they can and should come because that's part of discipleship. But like advice giving, it can show up at another time. At least wait until their bleeding or emotional bleeding stops. The fifth tip, and the biggie, is to expect discouragement. And I guess this tip could be taken a couple different ways, but I'm referring to the teenager's discouragement. But yes, you, as a caring adult, you will be discouraged at times listening to teenagers' issues. That's a normal part of youth ministry. But with this tip, expect discouragement, I'm really referring to the teenagers that you're caring for. See, the weight of the world keeps them focused on their own overwhelming problems, resulting in varying degrees of sadness and discouragement. And the destructive power of this discouragement often results in loneliness and isolation and even a deeper discouragement. Discouragement is really a big deal. And because it's such a big deal, let me spend the rest of our short amount of time together just giving you some specific ideas related to helping a discouraged teenager. Facilitate stronger connections. See, what I mean by this is we all need a support system of solid relationships, especially during seasons of sadness. So what we need to do is encourage the teenager to take an inventory of his or her friendships. This can help them identify specific ways to enhance the relationships and make them more meaningful. Being around friends can be a reminder of the good things in life. We also want to encourage them to share appropriately. If needed, encourage the teenager to openly share what's going on in his or her life. Now, obviously, this needs to happen in the right places. Unloading their burden onto the wrong person or group of people can work against her, so that would create more pain and distance and isolation. So when new friendships are forming, typically they're not strong enough to support a serious dose of discouragement. And you'll want to continue to be a safe place to listen and encourage her to be discerning in how and when and who she shares with. And also, I think we need to provide serving opportunities. Because God created all of us for significance, everyone can make a difference in this world. Some teenagers are experts at seeing only what's wrong in their life, and serving can actually become a great outlet for a new perspective. Serving is a great way to refocus anyone's outlook, exposing one of the positives that come from making a real contribution in this world. And a good way to change the mind is to engage the hands, and there is joy that can only be found in serving. Now, that's a lot of information that I just gave you, and I hope you'll take some time to unpack this with the other leaders that you're engaged in ministry with and talk about what it looks like for you to genuinely care for the students that God has entrusted to you. See, ultimately, you will best serve teenagers when you can accept your role in their life as a caring adult friend. You can't take away their free will. You can't make choices for them. You can't make them pursue a healthy lifestyle. But you can pray with passion, you can be present with joy, and you can reflect the love of Jesus. So thank you for doing that in an ongoing way. Blessings to you as you care for teenagers this week.